Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are, and thank you for joining us. My name is Matthew Crabb from QA Financial, and delighted to introduce Gary Hallam from Delphix. Gary is Director for Channel Enablement at Delphix, and the title of his seminar today is The Path for Digital Transformation and AI for Complex Markets, Complex Financial Markets, Starts with Data. A long title, but a really interesting topic. And I know that Gary is going to be diving into the technical specifics around one or two very important compliance and regulatory related topics. FRTB, data for upgrades to trading and risk systems for compliance with FRTB, the provision of data sets for CVAs and CVXs in the cloud, a really important current topic, as well, of course, GDPR requirements for client privacy and data protection, which are a key challenge for any financial firm. We know from our own research that the management of test data environments is one of the top challenges facing software developers at financial firms. And so very pleased to be introducing this seminar today. In a moment, I'm going to hand over to Gary, but one or two points of housekeeping and functionality of this online event platform. First of all, if you need any help, press the red help button toward the top right of your screen, because we've got staff there who can chat with you and help sort out any problems you have. There's a virtual exhibition at which Delfix has a stand, and you can see the virtual exhibition button to the right of your screen. You can go there anytime and have a look around, and there's lots of content, videos and white papers that you can download. But most importantly, you can meet Gary after his presentation, and there are other Delphix representatives there. You'll see a blue button once you go into that virtual exhibition, which will initiate a chat. And you can start the conversation. Of course, you can extend that into a meeting if you want. So if there are any points that Gary covers that you'd like to discuss further with him, visit the virtual exhibition. You can also, at the end of Gary's presentation, ask him questions, and you'll see a live Q&A button to the right of your screen. Just press that, write your question. I'll see it on my dashboard. And when Gary's finished the presentation, we'll have 5 minutes or so of Q&A. So please do ask questions. And that's it. I'm going to hand over to Gary now. Gary, thank you very much indeed.
Hi, thanks for that introduction, Matthew. So my name's Gary Hallam. I work for Delphix. I've been working for Delphix for about 5.5 years. And before that, I was working for Oracle, acquired into Oracle from BEA Systems. So my background is really middleware. I ran a pre-sales academy for Oracle, where I invited graduates from across Europe and trained them up in the art of pre-sales. I'm not sure how good a job I did. I hired probably about 30 people into Oracle, and ran the business across the globe, really. So Europe, Bucharest was where some of the people were, and also in India. So before then, I used to build telephone banking systems, would you believe, around the globe. So I built ABN AMRO's telephone bank. They're quite interesting, really. There's always been a problem with data. I've been testing and using data for a long while. And I remember building some stuff in Chase Manhattan Bank before they became JP Morgan Chase. And the first guy I asked, can I have your VSAM file of credit card data? And his very strong answer was, no, you're not touching that data, it's mine. So there are a lot of challenges around data. So I'm happy to be here today to present to you about the path to digital transformation. So let me open up my slides and we'll get into the show. And as Matthew said, look, we want this to be kind of interactive, right? So there's a Q&A panel that you can write questions in. Matthew will speak those questions to me and I'll try and answer them. And of course, if you want to talk after this presentation, and I can run on, so apologies for that before we start, then come and join the booth and speak to Ben Tobin or Annabelle or me, of course, when I finish the presentation. So let me see if I can work the technology and share my screen. So hopefully you can see these slides, the path to digital transformation. And our tagline at the minute in Delphix is let's put data to work, because that's what we really need to be doing. So hopefully everyone's joined now. You're sitting comfortably, you've got your popcorn. It's 3 o'clock in the afternoon, so I'll try and be vibrant and alive, and I'll try and keep you awake. So here we go. A world of pain. Well, perhaps and perhaps not. So those in digital business are probably doing fairly well, but many of us are not doing so well. But even in the digital world, it seems like things are moving very, very quickly. And no sooner have you got one light bulb moment that you've tried to implement that gets shattered by the next light bulb moment that comes along, and you're scrabbling around to learn the new technology. And it's daunting to think that since the turn of the millennium, we've lost over half of the Fortune 500 companies. They've simply disappeared. And it used to be that the larger companies, the more mature companies would see a young upstart and they would eat them. Okay, and so they grew by acquisition. But now that's no longer the case, right? It seems more that the fast young upstarts are chasing the bigger companies and destroying their business. And since things are moving so fast, we need to keep up. But how fast can you go, right? And it's going to be a bit of an interlude here, because I was surfing around the internet at the weekend, and this presentation popped up. Was from a guy called Brian Schull, and he was talking about the Blackbird, right, the SR-71, and it was a really inspirational talk. He talked for 70 minutes, and I sat riveted listening to it. This guy was shot down in a T-28 over Vietnam, crashed the plane into the jungle, couldn't eject, thought he was going to be burnt alive, managed to scramble out of the plane, got rescued by special forces. They thought he was going to die. But after a year in hospital, he managed to recover, and recovered so much so that he got back into the Air Force and became a pilot for the Blackbird. And there's some great stories in that conversation, and one of them was where he was instructed to fly over the Arctic Circle, head towards Russia, and get them to reveal some missiles that they'd placed around the Arctic Circle. And he actually questioned this instruction. He said, well, what if they fire the missiles at us? And the commander said, well, that would be great, because then we'll get the launch information. Now, you've got to imagine this plane was the fastest plane in the world, still holds all the world speed records. It can cruise in a climb faster than the exit velocity of a bullet. And at at Mach 3.5, it can get from Sacramento in California to Mildenhall in Suffolk in 3.5 hours, or it could, but it's now been mothballed. And it's amazing to think that this plane had no bombs, no guns, no missiles. It relied purely on speed, okay? And it's amazing, really, because its sole purpose was to collect data. And it was really interesting to me, because there's another story about it, because I grew up in Mildenhall, and this plane flew out of that base. And there was one day I happened to be playing rugby when the plane buzzed overhead. Afterburners on, everybody on the pitch stopped, except me, who was holding the ball. And that's one of the very few tries I've actually scored in rugby. So learning about the SR-71 and the Blackbird was a fantastic story for me. And I've left the link here, worth having a look if you're not only interested in getting your data to go fast. So let's get back to the subject, right? Let's talk about IT and what's going on in the world. So we talk about these 3 M's in Delphix. We're on this transformational journey. All businesses are going in that direction, or are already there. And they are around microtization. So we've gone from these long project approaches. And I know, because every telephone bank that I built used to take me about a year in different parts of the world, right? But now we went from waterfall to agile. We've got these DevOps and data ops processes. We're having this continuous integration. Things are microtizing. We're trying to make smaller and smaller releases. and faster releases as well. We've got site reliability and chaos monkeys trying to wreck things, and we need to just cope with all of this. And we've got artificial intelligence and machine learning building this stuff for us and making sure that we cover all bases as we get smaller and smaller and faster implementations. On top of that, we've got this migration, right? We've gone from the physical on-premise data centers to virtual machines and containers that are on-premise, moving to with VMware and Citrix and things like that, virtualizing the architectures, moving more now towards the cloud and software as a service and hybrid clouds where we've got multiple things running in clouds. And that's the migration process that a lot of us are going through. And then there's this modernization piece where we've gone from mainframes to open systems, that 3-tier architecture that we had, to infrastructure as a service, now platform as a service as well. And we're modernizing all the time. But one of the things that our CEO, Jed Yue, said that, in California, they have these multi-generational architectures, multi-generational houses. And that's the same in IT, right? Many companies have still got their mainframe whirring away in the background, delivering vast quantities of data, working at great speeds. We've got our ERP platforms that we built, they're still running there, but we've also got hundreds of applications. We're starting to move stuff out into the cloud infrastructure and platform as a service. We've got these software as a service things that we're migrating and moving stuff to as well. And you've still got all that email messaging and social data being created. And each of these rooms in our multi-generational architecture produces and consumes data. And actually, we need all of that data to understand what's running and what's going on in our business. And we have to understand that all of that plumbing, which makes, moving to the cloud, becoming digital, quite a complex process that really we need to kind of simplify that before we can move forwards. So on top of that complexity that we've got in these organizations, we've also got this regulation. And if you look at the FRTB, the Fundamental Review of the Trading Book, that's also all about data. If you look at what we need to do, we need to have many more calculations, many more data points in order to do these valuation adjustments. And as these people have stated, there's like to be a material increase. Well, there definitely is a material increase in the amount of data being produced, analyzed and validated. If you've got poor data, then you're going to have to have higher capital requirements. All of that data is really important, but also you're going to need to get that data from the front office to the back office to the regulators much more quickly. There's penalties for not doing that. How do you take that complex infrastructure that you've got and ensure that you're getting accurate, fresh, reliable data across the back office and over to the regulators? So data is an important subject there from that regulation perspective. And if you're in a retail banking world, with open banking, then it's really all about the test data. And not only that, you're sharing your customer data with other providers. And how are you going to protect that? What's that all about? And and a lot of that is all about APIs, right? And I draw an analogy here with the telco world, where we did the local loop unbundling, where BT were forced into two entities. They had OpenReach and they created this equivalence management platform. And actually, I was one of the first people to connect to that platform, unbeknownst to me until I'd actually done it. And I did it in a top floor of an office in BEA Systems. And it was actually a test system, but actually Orange were using that system to actually connect to that platform using EBXML was the protocol we were using at the time. And, security became really important. And one of the most important things around that, they developed a whole test regime around it. There were companies that came into play just to test that environment. And it was really strange. About 2 years after we'd implemented that, someone called me up and asked me for the password for the certificate that we'd used to connect to the equivalence management platform. That's the first time I've ever revealed that in public. So maybe I shouldn't have said that. So security is really important. Testing is really important. It's important with this open banking platform that you create competitive capabilities. Your capabilities can be delivered much more quickly, and that you get to that cloud and internet scale in order to be able to compete. And then, of course, you've got the privacy, compliance, and security. And with GDPR, it's really important that you understand where your sensitive data is. So you've got to profile your data and do that on a continuous basis so that you understand, if a developer creates a column in your table that's sensitive, you need to make sure you're not passing that data unprotected down to your lower test and development environments. You've got to mask the data. You need to potentially tokenize the data where you can get the value of the real value of the data back. And you need to be able to automate that to make sure to remove those errors that might be introduced by humans in the system. And of course, I'd be really interested actually to understand, your challenges around all of these points, both from, that complexity that I've described. Is that real in your organization? Have you simplified it in any way? Or through these regulations, what are you doing to manage the open blanking, or what have you done to move towards the requirements for FRTB and GDPR? I think they're interesting points, and I'd be really excited and interested to learn, where you guys have gone with that and what you're doing and how you've solved some of the problems, or indeed, some of the esoteric problems that these challenges have thrown up. Of course, there's always these scare stories and challenges around 4% of your global revenues for GDPR non-compliance. So with the Californian Act, a fine of $2.5 grand per lost record, per compromised record, right? But the important cost is the business and reputational risk. And obviously in South Africa, where I'm dealing at the moment, the Poppy Act there, which was going to be enforced in July, I was reading that the other day, and the maximum jail term is 10 years. So that really does make you want to actually comply with some of these regulations and not just hire a lot more lawyers into your organization. So, in order to cater for this massive amount of data, this move towards digitization, what we look at really, and what we're looking towards, and what we deliver within Delphix is a programmable data infrastructure. And the features of such an infrastructure are laid out in front of you here on this slide. So what you need to be able to do is to very rapidly and efficiently deliver data, right? So the data sprawl, if you look at testing environments, I was talking to a customer in Germany over a year ago now, and they were talking about their SAP infrastructure, and they had 60 copies of their production data. So their non-production estate was 60 times bigger than their production estate. So not only is that a massive amount of data to deal with, but also it's a massive surface area of risk if you've got production data inside of those non-production environments. But really, if you're proliferating data at that level and your production database is 10 terabytes, then 10 times 60 times 10 terabytes is a serious amount of data. So what we need to be able to do is to somehow virtualize that data or access that data without requiring too much storage. And so we need to be able to spin up these environments on limited storage and bring them down again, and do that all in a very, very fast way. In terms of privacy and compliance, we need to be able to find the data. We need to be able to automatically mask that data. And more importantly, it's okay creating masking algorithms and rules to mask things, but we have to put that masking process or put that masking job inside the provisioning process of the data. And that ought to be automatic. Otherwise, you're going to spend some time in that orchestration process of ensuring that the masking job gets run before you provision the data. And of course, when you're doing that masking, you've got to maintain integrity across your enterprise so that you can test the data and all of your systems still work from an end-to-end testing perspective. You've got to have version control where you can bookmark, branch, and refresh and rewind data. You need to be able to get the data where you're using it. And that's either, going from production to non-production, or to another data center in another part of your country or across the globe, or indeed into the cloud. So you need to often keep your cloud environments in sync with your on-premise environments. And a really important component is having this time machine. I know back in the old days when we were working on mainframes, I was talking to a guy a couple of weeks ago. He's talking about VAX VMS, and he said he had a fantastic transaction on that system that just rewound everything back to another point in time. And effectively had this time machine, and testing was a breeze. Okay, you can't really do that today because of our architecture that's spread across all clouds, across different data centers, right? So, but actually, the tool that we have within Delphix allows us to actually rewind data to another point in time, and that really improves and accelerates the speed at which we can deliver capability, which we can deliver applications and projects. And then, of course, one of the real powers is making sure that anything you can do manually, you can also do through an API. So you're going to need an API, and that's got to be an easy to use API that's comprehensive and allows you to plug data into your CI/CD environment, or in order to use self-service. So here I'm just going to go into a bit of a diagram of how Delphix works. So don't be afraid. I'm going to try and simply explain exactly what Delphix does, okay, and what it is. So Delphix is a piece of software. You download it as a .ova file, a virtual machine archive file, and you import it into what we call a hypervisor. But VMware, you import the software. It creates a virtual machine running on an operating system. You give it some virtual CPU, you give it some virtual memory, RAM, and give it some data. We like fast data. Flash data is good, or flash storage, sorry, is good. But there you have it. That's a simple way to install the product. We also, the same software is also installed in AWS or Azure or GCP or OCI or IBM's cloud, or on a Hyper-V device. So again, it's really just plug and play. There are some specific requirements around it, but effectively that's the product done. You then point it at your source data, and then we use the backup technology you're using today with that data to ingest the data into Delphix, right? And we pull all of the production or source data in. With Oracle, for instance, they have a thing called Recovery Manager. So we run an RMAN job, does a full backup the first time. That takes quite a long while to run. But then after that, we do an incremental ingestion, incremental backup forever. So we're only pulling the change data into the system. We're creating this rolling live archive of data, changing the backup and recovery paradigm within your organization. We can now press a button in Delphix and provision a virtual database. So that's really fairly straightforward, fairly simple thing to do. We're pulling the data in. We've got this rolling arc. We actually compress that data down to about 1/3 of its size. And we're ready to go. The next step, of course, is to provision a copy of that data. And the way that Delphix works to do that is it uses file pointers. Okay, so instead of if we get a 10 terabyte database, we've ingested it into Delphix, reduced it down to about 3 or 4 terabytes. To provision a copy of that database takes us just a few minutes. And we don't actually move much data at all. We'll move a gigabyte, maybe a few megabytes of data, and we'll create a virtual copy of that database. And the way that works is we create a mount point on the target system, and we actually just create a copy of a set of pointers to the data. So just to explain what pointers are, if you're running a file system on your computer and you've got a file, I don't know, a Word document, and you delete that Word document, what the operating system is actually doing, it's not actually moving any data at all. All it is doing is removing those access tables that point to the data that's sitting on your storage device, okay? And then eventually the operating system will write over that data. Well, the way that Delphix works is it manages those pointers, and it never really removes the pointers. It manages them so that we can create multiple pointers to that same Word document, if you like. So everyone can see it, and actually everyone can change it, because what Delphix does, whilst we share all of the pointers on that virtual copy, as soon as you update a virtual copy, we'll give you a new block of data and a new private pointer to that new piece of data. So the virtual database looks, smells, feels, and tastes like a real database. It is a real database. You can back it up, connect applications to it, but it's virtual, and all the data is actually residing in Delphix. So a good example of the sort of speeds that we can get, right? So a colleague of mine a couple of months ago called me up and he said, Gary, I've managed to provision 7.5 terabytes of data in just 2 minutes, which really, really disappointed me, because that was on a Murex system he was working on, and I was doing another proof of concept on a Murex system, but I'd only managed to put 2.5 terabytes in 4 minutes. So again, different architectures vary. He was running on a HCI hyperconverged infrastructure with VMware, so he's running on a VX rail, but still moving that amount of data was phenomenal. So we can put terabytes of data out there in a couple of minutes. We can secure that data as well by masking. But the real beauty as well is that there's no logical limit to the number of copies of that data that we can create. So we can actually, you can create a copy of your production data. We're completely separate from production. We're not having any impact on production any longer in this virtual world that we've got, but we can copy those virtual databases almost instantly. So we can create a clone from a clone almost instantly. That gives us a lot of value, because it means we can have this master copy of data and then provision a masked database almost instantly. Okay, and masking jobs can take quite a while to run. We have a customer in Turkey, and they had a masking job that ran for 3 weeks. They pressed the button and waited 3 weeks. We've managed to reduce that down to about a day and a half. But still, you know, if you're masking billions of rows, that's a long-term job that needs to work on. So you don't really be wanting to create a copy of your production environment and then waiting for that masking job to finish. You want to be doing that out of band, which you can do with Delphix, because we're on very little storage and we can deliver the data very quickly. Obviously, we don't have to mask the data, and there are a lot of capabilities or use cases around having a copy of production. So it might be in the trading world where you want to run, you know, some algorithms to get credit risk adjustments, right? So you may have 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 copies of that trading book and are running algorithms against that. Maybe you're changing data and you need a couple of clean runs in order to satisfy the regulator, or like I said, you're just doing these risk adjustments. And so that's a way where we potentially want real data. Other things such as business intelligence, maybe some end of day processing that you want to run you know, across the globe. So instead of physically copying the data, you might want to create a virtual database and run the transactions against that, run the batches against that. And the beauty of Delphix is that the virtual databases can actually perform better than your physical databases. And that's because we have an accelerator in the Delphix engine where we've got a compressed cache, which means that, you know, a lot of the data for batch-like transactions can be delivered from the cache that sits in the Delphix engine. Anyway, here's a picture of a real world example, right? This is an insurance customer, actually. They've got a 2.7 terabyte database ingested into Delphix incrementally down to about 750 gigabytes. They create a master copy of that database. It gets created in about 7 minutes. It's quite big because we've got lots of copies of that, and we're running the masking jobs, which puts a lot of changes on that database. But the downstream environments are provisioned in 3 minutes, and most of them are less than a gigabyte, and there's lots of them. Okay, so that's the sort of capability. That's fantastic, right? Delivering data. Be interesting to understand what you think about that and where that would bring value. Okay, and often it's not the fact that we're actually saving time in provisioning of data, but the other thing is that this is automated. I can press a button and get a running database. I don't need a DBA necessarily involved in that, and just the simple fact that I can do that and that infrastructure is in place without me having to go and get a ticket to make that happen really brings some speed and value to organizations. But it gets better than that, right? So the other thing that that people are looking at is empowering your users, right? Empowering users to actually own and manage their own data. And if you look at the world today, data is in all sorts of different forms, right? And you know, even if you've just got an Oracle database, a SQL Server database, maybe a DB2 database, and you're running something in RDS, you're going to need an expert in all of those systems in order to manipulate that data. And they've got to be coordinated in order to provide a copy of all of those data sets at a point in time. Okay, best we give the data to someone who understands the data and they can actually do that for themselves, but we haven't got enough time to teach people how to become a DBA on all of those systems. So what does Delphix provide, or what is a solution for that that requirement, right? So not only can we deliver data very, very quickly, but we can also put it in a container and give you a self-service interface so that now your end users can actually manipulate that data almost as well as your DBA. But in fact, in some cases better. So this is the web interface that we've got. Don't know about you, but I reckon my mum could operate this interface. And I was working with that same Murex customer actually in Kuala Lumpur, and I got their developers to press a button to back up a database, and it took, for that 2.5 terabyte database, well, 2 databases, it took 8 seconds to back up that data. So that backup is a bookmark, and the reason it's so quick is because those pointers I told you about, all we're actually doing a snapshot of are the pointers of the data, right? So that's just a few megabytes of data. So backing up is really, really quick. Why is that important? Well, if you've got a set of test users or developers, maybe they're Murex developers, because I know they're really cheap, right? They don't earn much money, a Murex developer, so you can get their 10 a penny. So if you don't really want them waiting for data, obviously I'm being facetious there, so you've got expensive resources waiting for another expensive resource, your DBA, to provision data. But actually, if I bookmark the data with this tool, I can then do whatever I need to the data, and I can press that restore button and go back to that baseline bookmark point in time. And that's fantastic for application development. Is fantastic also for masking development. Masking, to try and mask an application and still get that application to run, is a development process. So you may mask once in one way, break the application. With Delphix, you can rewind. With this self-service, you can rewind, go back to the point in time, and you're ready to go. But it actually gets a bit better than that, because we've also got that branch button there. And what the branch will do is will actually create a copy of the database. So again, we're working on these pointers, right? So it's a very fast operation. We'll take a snapshot of the pointers, and instead of putting that bookmark on the timeline, we'll create a new timeline. And that means you can create many copies of your 10 terabyte database that you've got a virtual copy of, and you can activate, using that activate button, whichever copy or whichever branch that you've created. And that's really quite powerful in the hands of someone that understands the database. It could be you create a branch, you refresh a new set of data from production, or you create some synthetic data at that branch, or you subset the data, or you delete all of the tables and create something completely new. But what it means is you can create a catalog of data for use in your development and test environments. And again, like I said, that data could have been masked as well. That's really quite useful, quite powerful. Other things that you can do with this as well, you can share your bookmarks. And that is a mad idea. It's a great idea, because by sharing a bookmark, what you're effectively doing is a kind of an ETL process. Because you can give a database to someone, they can play with it, get to maybe it's a test scenario, or maybe they could create some synthetic data or subset of data in an environment in another part of the world even. And if they share that bookmark, someone else with a similar virtual database can actually restore their database with the press of that restore button there to that other person's bookmark point in time. Incredible capability. Is just unbelievable, right? It really accelerates your application development process. So if you look at that, if you think about someone being empowered with data, you've got these end users, not really a DBA, they're developers, right? But now you've given them access to a tool which allows them to manipulate this database. It's quite interesting. There's a lead DBA in one of our customers who said to me, what I do, Gary, is these I think they're SimCore developers. They ask me for a copy of the database. I give them a copy of the database. I give them access to self-service, and I tell them I never want to hear from them again, because they've got all the data. They can refresh the data. He doesn't have to get involved again. And that's an incredible saving of time for that DBA who's got bigger and better things to do with his production environments. But actually, being empowered by data, these end users are getting instant, fully masked, complete sets of data on minimal storage. The administrator's got full control of the storage provision. So this container, you can tell it how much storage it's going to have. The end users have got full control. They can create instant backups, like I said, 2 terabytes in 8 seconds. Rapid restores back to those baselines, either backwards or forwards. They've got unlimited copies of data on that single connection string. So the application is still pointing to one virtual database, which is like I said, looks, smells and feels and tastes like a real database, but you're defining, the end user defining what data is actually being presented to that connection string. And if they're running low on the storage that the admins provided them, they've got control to delete those bookmarks or delete the branches. You know, they can create data scenarios, share those data scenarios, and have multiple environments and scenarios matching the test data needs. And all of that stuff can be automated with our REST API, which we've got an open source wrapper, Python wrapper around that, which is open source, which means you can download that executable. It's actually trivial to integrate Delphix, the provisioning of data, with any of your other tooling, right? Your CI/CD pipeline, you know, maybe you're committing code and you can automatically provision full multi-terabytes of data and automatically test that data, spin it up and spin those databases back down. And the other thing I forgot to mention, which is the last point on this slide, is that actually that container can have more than one database in it. So it's not, you're not just creating an Oracle DBA, but that container can have an Oracle database, a SQL Server database, Sybase database, a Murex application tree, and you can bookmark, restore, and rewind back to that same point in time across all of those data sets. So the only other thing I really got to mention is masking, right? So de-identifying data, which is really important in making sure, particularly with PSD2, where you're sharing customer data. You don't want your third party leaking data that you've managed to leak to them, right? So it's very important that we mask our environments, we de-identify the data for GDPR and other compliance purposes, right? And the way that Delphix works is it's comprehensive. So there's lots and lots of data sources that we support. And even if there's a data source that we don't support, you can upload your own JDBC driver. And even if that fails, we mask file systems. So we can mask a comma delimited file. So whatever system you've got, if you can unload that down to a CSV file, then we can mask that and you can upload it back. So we're pretty comprehensive in what we cover, which means we've got that end-to-end capability so that everything matches in your test environment. We provide consistent masking so that we preserve the referential integrity by doing something what we call deterministic masking. And there's only one algorithm, I think, out of the box that isn't deterministic, and that's for security purposes. That's one of our specific credit card algorithms, which masks a different way every time, and that's just specifically a customer that required that for increased security. And then also that data is usable. So when you mask some data, it needs to look like the real data. Otherwise, either your application is going to break, or your testers aren't going to really understand what the data is, or if you're running it in BI, the reports aren't going to make any sense. And I guess one of the main things that Delphix provides, and one of the things that you really need to look for in a masking solution, well, there's a couple of things really. One is the ability to mask very quickly, because you've probably got thousands of applications that need masking, and you need to get to each of those in order to become more and more compliant with the regulation and having to offset less and less risk. Okay. So being able to mask quickly is important, but being able to mask in an agile way. So if you create a masking algorithm and then you've changed the structure of your data, you don't want to have to go in and regression test all of those algorithms that you've created. Really, you want a looser coupling than that, and you want to be able to, constantly modify your inventory so that it automatically discovers and masks columns that get added or changed. Okay, so in this slide here, you can see we've got 8 base algorithms out of the box from which you can create custom algorithms. There's a lot of algorithms that come in the box, and it's quite simple to create this. One of the biggest used algorithm is a secure lookup algorithm. That works in a very simple way. We take the value, we base 64 encode that value. With that number that we've got, we mod that number, and then with the remainder number that we have, we'll go and look up that value, that number, in a lookup table and pull the value out of that lookup table. What we allow you to do is upload any lookup table you like, and that lookup table will be stored encrypted in the Delphix engine and provides a level of security. So with the secure lookup algorithm, we actually introduce collisions as well, so that two values can mask to the same value, and that provides another level of security. So lots of algorithms out of their box. They work really well, but if you still got some esoteric masking requirement or a requirement that you don't want anyone else to know about, then we'll also provide you with a custom algorithm that can be built with our SDK, which means that if you want to create format preserving encryption based on some methods that you've pulled from the NIST website, then you're able to do that. So we mask pretty well. So we can deliver data very fast. We can self-serve that data. We can synchronize all of the data in the self-service box. We can ensure that the data is masked, and that masking job can run in the provisioning process. The other capability that is really well used across our customers is the ability to replicate data. So if you've got two Delphix engines, one let's say in a production zone and one in a non-production zone, then we can incrementally replicate data between those engines. And we have a capability as well called selective data distribution, which means that you can mask in the production zone. And then when you replicate using SDD, selective data distribution, we will only move the masked data across to that non-production environment. Now, what that allows for is both PCI compliance and also data residency. So if in your masking job you delete a set of data or mask a set of data that needs to reside in a certain zone, then this will allow you to move the data across, keeping that data residency compliance intact. So that's selective data distribution. The way that the replication works, that's quite useful if you're moving test data into the cloud, for instance. But also a key capability is keeping the cloud in sync with what you've got on premise. And because the replication is incremental, if you're moving 100 terabytes of data, that's going to take some time. It will get that to the cloud. But actually, when you press the replication button again, we will only move the bits, the change data across. And in that way, you can keep cloud data in sync with your on-premise data, or indeed other cloud data in sync with your other clouds. So we have a customer, Molina, a health customer in the US, and they've moved data onto Azure, but they've also got applications running in AWS. But the whole view of their enterprise, they need all of that data to run within their report. So what they actually do is replicate the data down from Azure. Well, they actually replicate the data up in the first place, but all of that data that's working in those clouds can actually be replicated to an engine that sits on premise, so they can then run reports across all of the places that their data resides. So as this slide sort of suggests, data loves data. You've got a core application that can leverage all of that data across, all of the hybrid clouds that you actually use, and it's really quite a powerful tool. Also, looking at the regulators and the way, moving banking core applications into the cloud, the regulators got a requirement that you have to also get out of the cloud, get out of that platform if it's not serving you well, or if it's compromised for business continuity purposes. And this capability offers a solution around that as well. So we talked about the API, really quite useful. If you're committing code, we can quickly provision full sets of masked data in order for you to continually regression test that data. You can do that on an automated basis. You can have data catalogs using that branching technology in the self-service that I talked about to, spin up 7 different days of the week scenarios, run the tests through that, check that they've worked, and then go on to automatically commit that code and push it to have a production release into the production application. So that's it from me. That's all I wanted to say. So we talk about a programmable data ecosystem. We've got multiple data sources. We provide an SDK and some open source examples of how to ingest whatever data you like into the Delphix system. So you can have that self-service capability across all of your data sources. But not only that, with the API means that you can serve data for not just your test and development purposes, but also for your, site reliability purposes, for your artificial intelligence and machine learning. We can mask that as well, because you don't want to be training your AI with sensitive data, because it might choose one of those pieces of sensitive data to actually route, to route data to, or to learn against. So then you're proliferating, sensitive data across your systems. Okay, but that data pipeline enables sort of AI ops, DevOps, prod ops, and means that you're getting access to that data very, very quickly, and it means that you're being much more agile in the way that you're handling your data. And that's it from me. So like I said, I'm going to go over to the Delphix desk. If you've got any questions, come and see me over there. And we'll take that. Matthew, were there any questions online that I needed to
Yeah, Gary, thank you so much. Do you mind just turning off your presentation so we can see you again? Thank you very much for that.
Yep, there you go.
We do have a couple of questions. First of all, though, for anybody who joined Gary's presentation a little late, this will be available on demand later via our website, and we'll send you a link so that you can watch from the beginning if you did miss the start. Couple of questions, Gary, and again, you'll have to kind of interpret these because they are quite shorthand. Number one, what's the trade-off between masked and virtualized data? And I guess the question is about, it could be at least about, when is virtualized data better than masked data, and what is the speed cost trade-off involved?
It's quite an interesting question, right? Because I've gone into customers and they said, look, it takes us 7 days to mask the data. We need you to do it in 12 hours. Kind of impossible, right? You need to sort out an archive plan and get rid of the data that you don't need, or we need to delete some of that data. And often that's a complex process, right? But in terms of masking and having virtualized data, but virtualizing the data is pretty straightforward, right? And there's you need to get that virtual data. If you're going to use it without masking it, then you've got some risks, right? So you have to sign off the risk of that. So the infrastructure that you create around that and the people that you allow access into that data, you've got to manage the risk around that. I think that's the trade-off. If you want to mask, if you're going to mask data anyway, you're much better off masking on a virtual system. And there are a couple of reasons for that. I was working with a customer a while ago, actually, and they said to me, look, we've got these 9 test environments, and it takes us about 2 weeks to get the environments ready. So, we have to wait 2 weeks. I said, okay, well, we'll be able to provision the data much quicker than that. They said, yeah, but we still take a day to do the masking. And so they create a test environment, and then someone sits around waiting for a day for someone to do masking. I thought, well, why is this taking so long? And all it was that they had an SLA with a third party that was doing the masking job, right? And they'd created the database, then it was going to be masked, and then people could use it. But actually the masking job was masking 6 columns, right? And they were all email columns. So they weren't really doing any masking at all, but they had a 24-hour SLA. The job took 3 minutes to run. So, you're waiting that time to get that masked data. But actually with Delphix, or with a virtualized database, you're getting data on at such a low cost and so fast that actually you can do that masking out of band. So the idea being that as long as you can wait 24 hours for the data, you can have a test environment that people can run up to the point, you can mask the data out of band, and then you provision that masked copy, which takes a couple of minutes, and that test environment is only down for a couple of minutes.
Okay. Now we've got another question. It's a long question, so I'm gonna shorten it. But you mentioned FRTB. Somebody's asking about Murex and Finastra upgrades, and essentially they're saying these are becoming increasingly time-consuming. Are you seeing this in terms of your customer requirements for the data management? And I guess the subtext of this, Gary, is, can you speed up Murex implementations, which are getting Murex and Finastra implementations, for example, which are getting longer and longer? And I'm sure this goes for a lot of other trading and risk systems and capital markets platforms.
Well, the simple answer, yeah, absolutely. And we can speed it up by orders of magnitude, right? And the reason being is that, those upgrades have to be tested. I was talking to one customer that they said the last upgrade of Murex took them 3 years, right? Which is, I can't believe, to be honest. But actually, when working in that customer, you start to get a sense for why it takes so long, right? Because you've got multiple actors involved who really don't understand the specific requirements and the urgency and the nuances of what people need. As soon as you get 2 people doing a job, it takes a bit longer, right? And so what you're getting with Delphix is the ability for the end user to manage the data. And you're also getting that refresh happening automatically. So not only are you getting the data moved very, very quickly, but you're empowering the end user, because a lot of the time is taken in just waiting for data. If you imagine you've got a test to do and it takes 10 minutes to do that test, but actually to get a copy of the data takes 2 weeks. That's phenomenal, right? With Delphix, you could rewind in 2 minutes and run that 10-minute test. I mean, you could have 20 tests done in a day compared to that taking more than 2 months. So the agility that you can get and the speed of upgrade is massively increased by having something like Delphix in place. And the important thing as well is making sure that you're getting the performance from your virtual databases. And we've proven that. Like I said, this customer in the UK, they got a 7.5 terabyte database in 2 minutes. I mean, that provides value, but the self-service creates way more value than that. It was kind of a funny proof of concept, because it took 2 weeks to change a port on their firewall, but all of their users were spread at home. They were sitting at home, and so we couldn't change the firewall to get them access to the Delphix engine to run some of this self-service stuff. So we ended up doing that over the internet, right? And they were blown away by the fact that they could back up that database, run a backup as a developer, never seen the application before, but talk them through just backing up and restoring a database in a couple of minutes, right? So yeah, I mean, work it out for yourself. It really significantly improves the upgrade process.